What's up, survivalist Jason here. Today I'm showing you a free resource that could benefit your garden and your compost pile. And it's out here in wilderness. If you think about it, the forest floor is just full of life. There's always stuff decomposing, it's really healthy soil, so why wouldn't you come out here to take a few resources and put it into your garden or compost pile? So I'm going to show you a few things around here that I can find readily available, but I gotta warn you, you gotta make sure you're doing everything legally. Either if it's somebody's private property, ask permission, and also if it's like a national forest, make sure you have the proper permits and all that stuff for product harvest and everything that you need for that. Just check your laws in your area. Every area is different, so you never know who's going to get what. So let's check around and see what we can find. So the first thing on this list is animal droppings. So you're most likely going to find animal droppings out in the wilderness because there's a ton of animals in the area, as long as it's not really overhunted and anything like that. So one thing with the droppings is to make sure that it is a herbivore droppings. So this is some elk deer, what I think it is, and it's fairly dry. So one thing about the droppings as well is you want to make sure that you have really dried out droppings, because if you do it a little bit too fresh, it probably makes some type of disease into your compost pile, but also it would really burn out the roots on your plants. So you want to have something that's really dry. This might be needing a little bit more drier. You still see a little bit of green, but you can still definitely use this a lot. So let's collect this up and move on. Next thing is this really punky log. You can see, you can really just pull it right out. Sometimes they're just open up like this. You can just kind of kick it off, loosen everything up, and then grab your fill right there. This is going to be an excellent carbon source right here. It's already decomposing as well, so that really helps out with the speed of how fast you're going to get this new soil from these pieces. You can see how well that's already coming apart. So let's collect a few handfuls of these. And plus you could possibly use some of this punky wood for mulch, but it won't really last that long because it's already decomposing. So there you go, a few handfuls. So here's another spot for decomposition. So see right here, this is most likely what a log was laying, and has pretty much decomposed all the way except for a few little pieces of wood right here. But all right here is just really organic type of soil, already decomposed already almost. So you can definitely use this in there. There's a few deer droppings inside of here, so you could definitely take those if they were dry. That really, a little bit still green, but you can still dry them up. And you can definitely just get your fill on these type of logs. But don't overdo it. Do not over or harvest, because the plants and everything out here still need this for a healthy soil. And as you can see right here, there's a little bit of charcoal all around. Once in a while you probably see a few stumps that have a little bit of a fire burn on them, and that could be either from actual man-made type of fires, but also lightning strikes or anything like that. So you can definitely take some of this charcoal into there, and see right here, look at this. It's just a pile of just almost as like needles, the pine needles that have decomposed pretty much. That is really rich right there. So you can definitely take a lot of this right here. That'll give a good fill all right there. And it's just abundant around here. So it's definitely a good way to get a good source of decomposing items. So let's get on to the next thing. Another resource to keep an eye out for is some carpenter bee holes. And with the digging and tunneling inside of these dead logs, you'll get this
heap of pretty much sawdust. You can see how much sawdust there actually is here. There's quite a pile. So this is an awesome carbon source. So you can just take handfuls of this. And I think, in my mind, when it comes to these type of piles, you can take pretty much the whole thing. And it just comes apart really nice. A little bit of moisture in there, but that doesn't hurt, especially if it's coming right into the compost. But keep an eye out for these. Really great way to have some sawdust on hand. So the last thing on the carbon resources out here are dead leaves. These are probably have the most abundance out here in any forest. So you can find plenty of these all around. Get a nice few handfuls. You could crinkle them up to make them kind of decompose faster, because the smaller it is, the faster it decomposes. Even right here, you can see this one's pretty much all decomposed anyways. So you have plenty of these inside your compost pile to add a good carbon resource. But when it comes to pine needles, there is the myth of making the soil really acidic. But that isn't really 100% true. Yes, it adds a little bit of acidity, but most of these, when it turns brown, they pretty much lose a lot of their acidity. When they're pretty much green, they have a lot more acidity right now from right here. But still, it doesn't have as much and won't change it as much. It's mainly the trees that turn the soil acidic. So that is kind of like where it bases on. And there was a few videos that some other people made. I'll leave a description of them down below, so you can go check them out. And they did a whole test, and I put a probe inside the ground and see the acidity. So you could do what you want with that information. I'm gonna try to make a mulch out of these pine needles. I have a whole pile in the backyard, so I'm gonna use that to use some type of cover. So let's move on to the nitrogen sources. One nitrogen resource you might find out here is some wild grass. This isn't really the natural bladed grass. It's a little spherical, has a little bit of a groove, more or less. But this is plenty of nitrogen resources right here. So cut yourself off a little bit, make yourself a pile. It's like you can try to just kind of paw it out, but in some of the grass type things, you're most likely going to grab dead stuff instead of the green stuff. So there's a nice pile right there. See, right there is plenty of the dead stuff. And plus, when you cut it off, it doesn't really kill the plant if you happen to grab a little bit too much. So there is a nice pile of nitrogen rich material. And when it comes to this type of material, I like to stick it into some type of ditty bag or cinch bag, and just a little bit more space when it comes to putting it all inside of there. So let's find another thing to harvest. Now, since it's fall time, there isn't going to be a lot of green leaves out, but sometimes some bushes and some plants do have green leaves throughout the winter, and some of these plants that would definitely be great for putting into the compost pile. Just take off a little bit of leaves from the top of the limbs. It's pretty much like pruning the bush, and it still is healthy for the plant, so you're not overdoing it. It's just like sometimes when deer come by and snack on the tips of these leaves and its little branches, it could still live on, but just don't overdo it. There we go. So we got enough right there. So a nice little bounty of leaves to put inside the compost pile. Here's another plant that you can possibly compost when it comes to nitrogen. We have a mullen. So when it comes to these type of plants, when it's fresh on its first year, I would recommend to only take the outer bigger leaves and leave the center, because that leaves the actual plant still living and still gives it enough to actually grow. Now when it comes to these stalks, you can still take it But I'm gonna make sure take off the seed pod area. This whole thing top right here is just chock full of seeds. You can see how much seeds are falling out of that. And you don't want that inside of your garden because it would just get infested by it. So with this whole thing, you can try to break it off at the tip, but sometimes they're quite soft. So you probably need a knife to pull it off or cut it off. But sometimes you can just barehand it if you like. But this does give you some nice little material. You can break this apart in little pieces. It's a little pithy inside, so it kind of decomposes pretty easily. But the leaves on here as well, these are really nice. They still have a little bit of nitrogen in them because they're just starting to die, but you can see how good that looks right there. So you can definitely use this inside of your compost pile. Another resource to keep an eye out for are bones. So there's going to be plenty of animals out here. That means there's going to be some dead animals, and sometimes the carcasses are picked over, sometimes bones are left from the coyotes bringing it to a certain spot just to chew on and have fun with. But also when it comes to taking some of the meat kind of stuff and like the rotting pieces, you got to be careful because it can attract vermin and other predators into your pile if you don't want that. But it really depends on your take on a compost pile, but it still definitely can be composted. When it comes to a single bone like this, I would just kind of break it up, grind it, and then make it into some type of powder. I would use that powder inside of the garden beds and the compost pile. That will give it a great source of calcium and other nutrients that this provides. So this is an awesome find.
So here's our haul today. Didn't get as much nitrogen-rich material, especially since it's fall time. But I think once it warms up, it gets into springtime, you'll find plenty more, especially if you're out harvesting wild edibles. If you find a wild edible that doesn't look necessarily tasty or doesn't look that good, you just put it right in your compost pile and just leave it so it doesn't waste it. But you still do if you find plenty of carbon-rich material. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it found it educational. I want to thank you all for watching. See you in the next one.